Picture a lawmaker, tired and caffeine-addled, staring at a blank page. Somewhere in that exhausted brain, a thought crystallizes. You know what America really needs? A law about pickles. Welcome to the bizarre legislative theater where sanity took a permanent vacation and absurdity signed a lifetime lease. 1. The medicinal whiskey gold mine. Prohibition arrived in 1920 with all the moral certainty of a tent revival, banning the demon alcohol across every corner of America. But lawmakers, in their infinite wisdom, carved out one spectacular exception: medicinal whiskey. Suddenly, doctors wielded prescription pads like golden tickets, authorizing patients to collect a pint every 10 days from their friendly neighborhood pharmacy. Millions of Americans discovered urgent medical conditions curable only by old granddad. The American Medical Association, which had declared alcohol medically worthless just years earlier, performed an ethical backflip and endorsed it for nearly 30 ailments. Walgreens Pharmacy exploded from a humble 20 stores to 525 by 1929, legally pushing booze while competitors scrambled. The government had accidentally transformed whiskey into America's most popular prescription drug, proving that loopholes aren't bugs in legislation, they're features. 2. The fortune cookie paradox. Here's a delicious contradiction that keeps FDA lawyers awake at night. Fortune cookies are technically illegal in the United States. The 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act explicitly forbids embedding any non-nutritive object inside confectionery, the exact statute that makes Kinder Surprise eggs contraband at the border. Customs agents treat those chocolate eggs like narcotics, seizing 30,000 in 2015 alone. Yet somehow, fortune cookies containing paper slips enjoy a cultural immunity no one can explain. The government's logic? A plastic toy represents a deadly choking hazard requiring federal interdiction, but a slip of paper predicting romantic fortune is just harmless fun. This isn't regulatory oversight, it's selective enforcement masquerading as food safety, where cultural familiarity determines which embedded object threatens national health and which gets a pass. 3. The Zion Curtain. Mixology behind enemy lines. Utah restaurants must prepare alcoholic beverages behind a partition called the Zion Curtain, transforming every bartender into a mysterious wizard, performing forbidden magic out of customer sight. The drink materializes through a small window, fully formed, as if conjured by unseen forces. This legislative masterpiece was designed to shield children from the supposedly corrupting spectacle of cocktail preparation, because apparently watching someone shake a martini is the gateway drug to moral collapse. It's culinary theater where the main act is hidden, turning routine bartending into a clandestine operation worthy of Cold War espionage. The bartender isn't crafting a beverage, they're operating behind enemy lines, protecting innocent eyes from the dangerous glamour of ice, vermouth, and a cocktail shaker. 4. The Great Crawfish Heist. Louisiana doesn't mess around when it comes to its mud bugs. The state has specific felony legislation for crawfish rustling. Stealing these crustaceans from farms or traps can earn you a decade in prison. That's right. Liberating a few pounds of bottom-feeding crustaceans carries harsher penalties than some violent assaults. It's the modern equivalent of cattle rustling, reborn in miniature form with claws and antennae. This isn't just protecting commerce, it's treating swamp shrimp with the legal reverence usually reserved for gold bullion. Louisiana has essentially declared that its crawfish are so culturally vital, so economically precious, that stealing them constitutes a crime against the state itself. Somewhere, a career criminal is reconsidering his life choices after getting 10 years for a bucket of crawfish. 5. The bagel tax sorcery. In New York, slicing a bagel triggers fiscal alchemy of breathtaking stupidity. Purchase a whole bagel? Tax-free grocery item. Ask the shopkeeper to slice it? Congratulations, it's now prepared food subject to 8.875% sales tax. This isn't about toasting or smearing cream cheese. The simple act of a knife passing through bread changes its entire tax classification. It's bureaucratic wizardry that punishes convenience, where the physical state of baked goods determines their relationship with state revenue. One enterprising bagel chain tried stuffing cream cheese inside whole bagels to circumvent the tax, creating a loophole within a loophole. The state tax code has effectively declared that slicing transforms ingredients into something fundamentally different, not in taste, not in nutrition, but in the eyes of tax law. 8 cents might seem trivial, but it represents government overreach at its most absurdly granular. 6. The moose prohibition. Alaska needed a law, an actual statute making it criminal to give alcoholic beverages to moose. Let that sink in. Legislators convened, debated, voted, and officially declared that getting 1,500-pound antlered neighbors drunk constituted a problem serious enough for legal intervention. What chaos preceded this rule? What catastrophic series of booze-soaked moose encounters forced Alaska's government to say, enough is enough, no more rounds for the wildlife? It's official state policy. You may live in the last frontier, where humans battle nature daily, but under no circumstances should you buy a beer for a moose. This law exists because somewhere, sometime, enough Alaskans thought plying massive ungulates with liquor was acceptable behavior. The legislation stands as a monument to humanity's capacity for spectacularly bad judgment, and Alaska's willingness to write it into law. 7. The soup slurping prohibition. Ocean City, New Jersey, a town that tolerates boardwalk chaos and summer tourist mayhem, draws its line in the sand at soup consumption. A local ordinance makes slurping soup in restaurants or public eating places illegal, not disruptive eating generally, not loud dining, specifically the audible enjoyment of soup. In a state famous for its boisterous, colorful characters, this represents a tiny rebellion of propriety. You can have a wild time on the boardwalk, ride every ride screaming, but approach your clam chowder with the hushed reverence of a librarian. The law weaponizes table manners, turning a satisfying slurp into a potential misdemeanor. It's government regulation of sound itself, policing the very frequency of your dining experience. Your soup might be delicious, but enjoying it audibly makes you a criminal. 8. The sidewalk ice cream felony. Carmel, California once criminalized eating ice cream while standing on sidewalks. This wasn't public health policy. It was about preventing sticky sidewalk messes. The ordinance became synonymous with the town's fussy, overregulated nature, a symbol of bureaucratic absurdity strangling simple pleasures. Then 1986 arrived, bringing with it a newly elected mayor named Clint Eastwood, who looked at this nonsense and essentially told the city council to make his day. The ordinance disappeared, ice cream lovers walked freely, and Carmel learned that sometimes the most effective government action is removing stupid rules. It's a beautiful example of legislation so pointless that it took a Hollywood icon to embarrass it into extinction. The law stood as proof that local government can become so obsessed with tidiness that it criminalizes joy itself. 9. The horse-stealing ice cream gambit. Alabama's law against carrying ice cream cones in back pockets sounds like bureaucratic madness until you learn its origins. This was anti-horse theft legislation disguised as dessert regulation. Clever criminals would place a cone in their back pocket, the sugary treat luring horses to follow without technically stealing them. Alabama's solution wasn't redefining theft. It was outlawing the weaponization of frozen desserts. The state effectively declared your pants cannot function as mobile snack dispensers for equine accomplices. It's legislative genius. Instead of addressing the crime directly, criminalize the bait. Somewhere in Alabama's past, horse thieves became so creative, so audacious in their ice cream-based schemes, that lawmakers had to respond with equally specific countermeasures. The law remains a tribute to criminal innovation and legislative desperation locked in eternal combat. 10. The bouncing pickle statute. Connecticut once had exacting standards for pickle legitimacy that sound absurd until you consider the science. A proper pickle had to bounce when dropped from a specific height. This wasn't whimsy, but quality control. The bounce test indicated proper fermentation and structural integrity. Floppy pickles were inferior products, unworthy of Connecticut's cucumber standards. This created an official state-sanctioned pickle quality assurance program, where government inspectors presumably spent their days dropping cucumbers and measuring rebound. It's regulation at its most wonderfully specific, where physical properties determine legal compliance. The law implies Connecticut once faced a pickle crisis so severe that bounce metrics required legislative intervention. Somewhere, a pickle inspector earned a paycheck by repeatedly dropping fermented vegetables and recording results with scientific precision. 11. The Chicago Fire Dining Protocol. Chicago has a law forbidding eating in places that are on fire. Read that again. This isn't culinary advice, it's a legal mandate. The ordinance implies the city once faced a genuine crisis. Patrons so devoted to their meals they ignored flames, smoke, and screaming firefighters to finish their steaks. It's perhaps the greatest unintentional compliment to Chicago's food scene ever codified. The food is literally so good that people would apparently choose death over abandoning their deep dish pizza unfinished. This rule forces a fascinating question. What catastrophic dining disaster necessitated writing this down? How many people stubbornly refused evacuation, fork in hand, declaring, "I paid for this meal and I'm eating it," while their restaurant transformed into an inferno? The law is both a public safety measure and a backhanded tribute to culinary excellence worth dying for. 12. The Teacup Wine Conspiracy. Topeka, Kansas restaurants are legally banned from serving wine in teacups. This isn't about aesthetics. It's a Prohibition-era relic designed to foil speakeasies disguising booze as afternoon tea. During those dry years, establishments would sneak alcohol to customers in china cups, pretending it was Earl Grey when it was actually bathtub gin. Kansas responded with surgical legislative precision, outlawing this specific presentation method. Today, the rule stands as a warning against whimsical beverage service, a reminder that teacups were once instruments of criminal enterprise. The government was genuinely concerned that fine china represented a gateway to rampant debauchery. You can serve wine in glasses, goblets, even mason jars, but attempt to pour it into a teacup, and you're reviving Prohibition-era criminality. It's a law that takes tableware regulation to absurd extremes. 13. The Garlic Exclusion Zone. Gary, Indiana once waged war on bad breath with legislation targeting garlic consumers. An old ordinance banned anyone who'd eaten garlic within 4 hours from entering movie theaters or riding streetcars. This wasn't vampire protection, it was the state officially declaring war on aromatic lunch choices. Imagine a time when your seasoning preferences could get you ejected from public transportation. It's government overreach that's both intrusive and deeply insulting to Italian cuisine. The law essentially created a garlic exclusion zone, where citizens faced a choice: flavorful food or civic participation. Someone, somewhere in Gary's government, decided that municipal peace required regulating not just behavior, but the lingering olfactory consequences of dietary decisions. It represents a level of social control so granular it policed the air around citizens, making personal chemistry a matter of public concern. 14. The Phantom Pizza Crime. Louisiana will fine you $500 for having pizza delivered to someone's house as a prank. This isn't covered by general harassment laws. It has its own specific statute. The state has elevated a classic high school prank into a serious crime with significant financial penalties. It means delivery drivers aren't just carrying pepperoni pizza. They're potentially transporting evidence in legal disputes. The law acknowledges that unwanted pizza constitutes a form of harassment serious enough for dedicated legislation. Somewhere in Louisiana's past, phantom pizza orders became such a widespread plague that lawmakers convened specifically to address this crisis. The statute transforms teenage comedy into adult criminality, making the delivery person an unwitting accomplice in your telecommunications-based harassment. It's legislation that takes pizza extremely seriously, defending citizens' right to order their own food without prankster interference. 15. The free lunch deception. There's no such thing as a free lunch wasn't just cynical wisdom. In many states, it was actual law. During the saloon era, bars offered complimentary food loaded with salt. Cured ham, pretzels, cheese. The strategy was brilliant. Make customers desperately thirsty, then sell them endless beer. Temperance movements recognized this marketing trick and successfully lobbied for laws banning free food as alcohol bait. The government officially outlawed the world's oldest sales tactic, making it illegal to use complimentary snacks to drive beverage purchases. It represents one of history's rare moments when legislation correctly identified and eliminated a manipulative business practice. The laws acknowledged what everyone knew. The lunch wasn't free. You paid for it in overpriced drinks and a massive hangover. Lawmakers essentially said, we see what you're doing and we're making it illegal. 16. The pickle juice assault. Rhode Island has one of America's most bafflingly specific laws. It's illegal to throw pickle juice on trolleys. We desperately need the origin story. Who was this brine-wielding menace? Armed with jars of pickle juice, waging a one-person war against public transit. What motivated this aqueous assault? Was it revenge? Performance art? A deeply personal vendetta against streetcars? The law's existence proves that somewhere, someone did this. Not once, but frequently enough to require legislative intervention. It's a perfect example of ultra-specific legislation written in response to one very weird person's very weird hobby. The rule implies that pickle juice trolley attacks became enough of a problem that Rhode Island's government convened, debated, and voted to explicitly criminalize this particular behavior. It's beautiful in its specificity, forever immortalizing an unknown pickle juice warrior in legal code. 17. The beef soup speakeasy. Nebraska once required all bars to brew a kettle of soup to legally sell beer. This genius workaround emerged from Prohibition's restaurant licensing system. To qualify for a liquor license, establishments needed to be restaurants. The simplest solution? Keep soup perpetually simmering. This created the hilarious image of tough Midwestern bartenders pulling pints with one hand while dutifully stirring minestrone with the other, all to maintain a transparent legal fiction. Nobody came to these bars for soup, they came for alcohol. But the soup had to exist for licensing purposes. It's regulatory theater at its finest, where the government and businesses engaged in mutual pretense. Everyone knew why the soup existed, but as long as that pot kept bubbling, the beer could keep flowing. The law forced every speakeasy to cosplay as a restaurant, creating Nebraska's most inauthentic dining scene in history. 18. The Sunday Pie Prohibition. Seattle once declared holy war on Sunday dessert, making pie sales criminal on the Sabbath. This wasn't about public health. It was a Puritan blue law designed to keep Sunday sacred by making it unbearably boring. The logic was simple. Deprive people of pleasure and they'll focus on worship. You could invent the future in your garage, launch tech revolutions, but purchasing a slice of rhubarb pie on your day off? Criminal offense. Though no longer enforced, it paints a picture of a city where innovation was encouraged, but dessert was regulated according to the calendar. The law represented America's long, weird relationship with legislating morality through food restrictions. Seattle's government essentially declared that certain days were too holy for fruit-filled pastries, as if the act of eating pie somehow desecrated the Sabbath. Its religious observance enforced through dessert prohibition. 19. The Margarine Wars. Wisconsin waged legislative warfare against margarine for decades, viewing it as a pale fraud attempting to usurp butter's golden throne. Laws either banned yellow margarine outright, taxed it into obscurity, or required restaurants to serve butter by default unless customers specifically requested the inferior spread. As America's dairyland, Wisconsin treated margarine like a foreign invader threatening its cultural identity. The state wasn't just protecting economic interests. It was defending the very soul of dairy farming through aggressive protectionism. For years, margarine could only be sold in unappetizing white blocks, forcing consumers to manually add yellow coloring if they wanted it to look like butter. Even now, statutes insist restaurants must offer real butter first. Wisconsin's anti-margarine crusade represents food legislation as cultural warfare, where dairy supremacy was so important it required multiple laws to maintain butter's dominance over its cheaper, vegetable-based rival. 20. The Tomato Cocktail Conspiracy. Massachusetts once banned serving alcohol in the same container as tomatoes, making Bloody Marys technically illegal. This wasn't modern health consciousness, it was Puritan-era paranoia codified into law. Tomatoes, being part of the nightshade family, were incorrectly believed poisonous for centuries. Lawmakers feared mixing this toxic fruit with liquor would create a deadly concoction and banned the combination outright. The law stood for decades as a monument to bad science and legislative hysteria. It's a perfect example of how medical misconceptions can become legal doctrine, outlasting the ignorance that created them. While the rest of America was experimenting with tomato-based cocktails, Massachusetts maintained its prohibition, protecting citizens from a danger that never existed. The law implies a fascinating alternate history where bartenders faced prosecution for mixing vodka with tomato juice, turning brunch's favorite hangover cure into a criminal beverage. Its scientific illiteracy transformed into public policy. 21. The Sandwich Shop Horn Assault. Little Rock, Arkansas specifically prohibits honking car horns at sandwich shops after 9 p.m. Not pizza places, not burger joints, exclusively sandwich establishments. This targeted legislative strike implies the city once faced a crisis. Hordes of drivers, desperate for pastrami on rye, laying on their horns long after respectable society had gone to bed. The specificity is stunning. Someone could honk at a deli at 8:59 p.m. with impunity, but 1 minute later, they're criminals. The law paints a picture of late-night sandwich enthusiasts so passionate, so urgent in their desire for cold cuts, that acoustic assault seemed like reasonable communication. Little Rock's solution wasn't addressing noise complaints generally, it was surgically targeting sandwich-related honking during specific hours. The ordinance forever immortalizes an unknown group of nocturnal sandwich fanatics whose behavior was so disruptive it required its own law. 22. The Shared Coffee Felony. Riverside, California made it technically illegal for two people to share a single cup of coffee. The law explicitly prohibits sharing food or drink from the same container, cup, or utensil. A noble public health intent that inadvertently outlawed romance. Sharing a milkshake with 2 straws on a first date? Public health violation. The literal wording transforms a simple gesture of intimacy into a criminal act. It's classic regulatory overreach where well-meaning safety rules accidentally criminalize human connection. The law doesn't distinguish between strangers sharing germs and couples sharing dessert. All communal consumption is equally prohibited. Someone drafting this ordinance was so focused on preventing disease transmission, they failed to consider that sharing food is a fundamental expression of trust and affection. The result is legislation that makes every romantic diner a potential lawbreaker, turning sweet moments into health code violations. It's germ theory taken to dystopian extremes. 23. The Undersized Crab Police. Maryland treats blue crabs with reverence usually reserved for precious minerals, establishing rigid minimum size requirements enforced by surprise inspections. State law mandates that any crab smaller than the legal dimension must be immediately returned to the water. This isn't a suggestion, it's enforceable with devastating consequences. The crab police arrive unannounced at restaurants and seafood markets, wielding official calipers to measure catches with scientific precision. Getting caught with undersized crabs results in crippling fines and potential business license suspension. Maryland hasn't just regulated crab sales, it's created an enforcement regime worthy of diamond smuggling. The state views undersized crabs not as inferior products, but as insults to Maryland's official identity. Somewhere, a restaurant owner lives in fear of the internal black spot or hollow heart conditions that could render their entire inventory legally unsellable. It's food regulation as cultural defense, where crab dimensions become matters of state importance. 24. The Potato Inspection Regime. Idaho's potato laws are famously strict, prohibiting the sale of any potato with rot, frost damage, or sunburn. This sounds simple until you encounter the extensive charts and legal definitions for acceptable blemishes. Farmers and distributors live in fear of conditions like internal black spot or hollow heart, imperfections that could render their product legally unsellable. The state treats each potato as a representative of Idaho's identity, viewing imperfection not as natural variation, but as criminal fraud. It's as if Idaho believes that every damaged potato insults the state's reputation, requiring comprehensive inspection protocols. This isn't just quality control, it's potato nationalism, where tubers must meet exacting standards to bear the Idaho name. The legislation created an entire enforcement apparatus dedicated to examining potatoes for microscopic flaws, turning farming into a high-stakes quality assurance operation, where a single blemish can destroy market access. 25. The burger bite theft. Oklahoma has a specific statute making it illegal to bite another person's hamburger without permission. While this could easily fall under broader theft or assault laws, the state dedicated specific legal code to this exact culinary crime. Its existence strongly suggests Oklahoma once faced a widespread epidemic of burger violations so brazen and offensive they required their own special legal category. Who was this phantom burger biter? What motivated their attacks? Was it hunger, malice, or simply poor impulse control? The law forces us to ask why Oklahoma needed burger-specific legislation when general property laws should suffice. The answer lies somewhere in Oklahoma's past, where burger violations became frequent enough that legislators convened specifically to address this crisis. It's legislation that takes food theft extremely personally, elevating a bite of someone's hamburger from rudeness to criminal offense worthy of its own statute. 26. The beer and pretzel prohibition. North Dakota prohibits restaurants and bars from serving beer and pretzels simultaneously. This pointless restriction is a relic of old-fashioned moral panic. Lawmakers saw the classic German combination as too enticing, too stereotypically foreign, and therefore too likely to encourage excessive, un-American levels of drinking. The law attempted to legislate away temptation by legally separating a salty snack from its favorite liquid companion. While no longer enforced, it remains on the books as a silent monument to xenophobic temperance logic. The statute implies that North Dakota's government genuinely believed Germans had weaponized the beer and pretzel combination to corrupt American drinkers. By prohibiting simultaneous service, they hope to break the cycle of salt-induced thirst leading to excessive alcohol consumption. It's cultural prejudice masqueraded as public health policy, where a snack pairing became evidence of foreign moral corruption requiring legislative intervention. 27. The visible intoxication paradox. Washington's dram shop law prohibits serving drinks to visibly intoxicated customers. Standard everywhere, but Washington's version is notoriously strict, creating impossible paradoxes for bartenders. The law requires them to be amateur diagnosticians capable of determining precise intoxication levels. Serve one drink too many? Severe liability for both bartender and establishment. Cut someone off too early? Face angry customers and lost revenue. It turns pouring beer into a high-stakes medical judgment call performed dozens of times nightly. Bartenders become unwitting gatekeepers, legally responsible for assessing strangers' blood alcohol levels through observation alone. The law provides no objective standards. It's entirely subjective, making every serving decision potentially actionable. It represents regulation that sounds reasonable in principle but becomes nightmare in practice, transforming routine bar service into a legal minefield where bartenders must choose between liability, customer satisfaction, and their own judgment under impossible circumstances. 28. The Lunchbox Class War. Las Cruces, New Mexico once prohibited carrying lunchboxes down Main Street. This wasn't a safety concern. It was pure snobbery codified into law. The ordinance was reportedly enacted to prevent laborers and working-class citizens from being visible with their modest packed lunches, which might project a poor, unsophisticated image to wealthy visitors and potential investors. It was legislated classism, a rule designed to hide everyday life from delicate elite sensibilities. The law essentially declared that visible working-class existence was bad for business, so better to criminalize their presence during lunch hours. It's regulation as aesthetic control, where the sight of someone carrying their own food constituted an offense against the town's carefully curated image. Las Cruces wanted to project prosperity, and apparently nothing said poverty quite like a metal lunchbox. The ordinance stands as one of America's most blatantly discriminatory food laws, written explicitly to make working people invisible. 29. The cherry pie a la mode outrage. Kansas once made it illegal for restaurants to serve cherry pie with ice cream. Pie a la mode, one of humanity's greatest culinary achievements, was an outlaw. The origin remains murky, but its existence represents an assault on happiness itself. This isn't just a dumb rule, it's an attack on the fundamental fabric of American dessert culture. Cherry pie alone is acceptable. Ice cream by itself poses no threat, but combine them? Criminal offense. The law implies Kansas legislators convened and decided this specific dessert combination was so dangerous, so threatening to public welfare, that it required prohibition. No other pie faced this restriction. No other ice cream pairing was criminalized. Just cherry pie with ice cream. A combination so perfect it apparently terrified Kansas lawmakers into legislative action. The statute stands as proof that government can become so controlling it regulates not just food, but the specific combinations in which that food can be enjoyed. 30. The Chowder War Declaration. Maine passed legislation making it illegal to add tomatoes to clam chowder. This isn't a chef's suggestion, it's a legislative decree. The bill, introduced in the 1930s, was designed to protect traditional cream-based New England chowder from the tomato-based horror known as Manhattan-style chowder. While penalties were never enforced, it stands as a permanent declaration of culinary warfare. Maine's government essentially said, we don't care what Manhattan does, but here, tomatoes and chowder constitute an offense against tradition. It's food regulation as cultural identity, where chowder preparation became a matter of state pride, requiring legal protection. The law implies that tomato-based chowder represents such a threat to Maine's culinary heritage that only legislation could preserve authenticity. It's regionalism taken to legislative extremes, where government intervenes in recipes to maintain cultural purity. The statute forever memorializes Maine's position in America's great chowder debate. Cream or nothing. 31. The Deceptive Packaging Crusade. Nebraska once had comprehensive laws against deceptively packed food containers, prohibiting false bottoms or packing material designed to make products appear fuller than reality. In an age before standardized packaging, this was crucial consumer protection against widespread fraud. It was the government saying, we know you want to put fewer chips in that giant bag, and we're not letting you get away with it. The law targeted a very specific scam, manufacturers creating packages that promised abundance but delivered disappointment. It's regulation at its most practical, protecting consumers from the oldest trick in the retail playbook, making the package bigger than the product. The statute implied Nebraska once faced such rampant food packaging fraud that dedicated legislation was necessary. Today, we take standardized serving sizes for granted, but this law represents an era when buying food was a gamble, and packaging was often deliberate deception. It's consumer advocacy that seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then. 32. The Burrito Taxonomy Battle. New York's tax code declares that burritos are not legally sandwiches. This distinction matters enormously because sandwiches are taxable while other grocery items aren't. A court officially ruled that because burritos are typically eaten with fork and knife, at least in formal settings, they fail to meet the legal definition of a sandwich. This means your lunch choice has direct tax implications, decided not by ingredients, but by judges' opinions on proper burrito eating etiquette. It's taxonomic regulation where government lawyers debate food classification with courtroom solemnity. The ruling created a bizarre legal precedent. The method of consumption determines tax status. Somewhere, a judge wrote an opinion explaining why tortilla-wrapped ingredients fundamentally differ from bread-based sandwiches in the eyes of tax law. It's bureaucracy obsessed with definitions, where the line between sandwich and not sandwich becomes a matter of revenue collection, requiring judicial interpretation. The case represents government regulation at its most absurdly philosophical. 33. The Sunday Deli Discrimination. New Jersey once made it illegal for delicatessens to open on Sundays if the owner was Jewish. This classic blue law collision with religious observance created a strange discriminatory rule, forcing deli owners to choose between faith and weekend sales. The intent was enforcing a day of rest, but it singled out a specific business type and specific religion, creating targeted discrimination masquerading as religious protection. The law essentially said, we're forcing you to observe the Sabbath whether you want to or not, and we're doing it by killing your Sunday revenue. It's religious regulation that's simultaneously insulting and economically devastating. Non-Jewish deli owners faced no such restriction. Jewish owners of non-deli businesses weren't targeted. Only Jewish delicatessens faced this specific prohibition, making it one of America's most blatantly discriminatory food laws. It represents a time when government freely weaponized religious identity to control business operations, creating a legal double standard based entirely on the owner's faith. 34. The fresh cheese paradox. Wisconsin, the state most famous for cheese, has laws that accidentally criminalize its own signature product. State law requires all cheese to be aged at least 60 days unless made from pasteurized milk. The original goal was food safety, killing harmful bacteria through aging. The unintended consequence? Fresh cheese curds, Wisconsin's most iconic squeaky delicacy, become technically illegal when served at peak freshness. This creates an absurd situation where the state most associated with cheese has laws potentially criminalizing restaurants serving that cheese in its most celebrated form. It's regulation with good intentions creating results at war with Wisconsin's own culture. Legislators tried protecting public health but accidentally made fresh cheese curds, the state's unofficial snack, legally questionable. The law represents bureaucracy's inability to account for nuance, where blanket safety rules conflict with regional food traditions, forcing Wisconsin to either ignore its own laws or abandon its cheese curd heritage. 35. The butter application mandate. Minnesota once prohibited restaurants from serving pre-buttered bread. If customers wanted butter, they received bread and a separate butter pad to apply themselves. This was Minnesota's contribution to fierce butter versus margarine wars, ensuring restaurants couldn't secretly substitute cheaper margarine for real butter. The state was so protective of its dairy industry, it regulated the exact moment of butter application. It's legislative micromanagement taken to spectacular extremes, where government controlled not just what was served, but how and when it was prepared. The law implies Minnesota didn't trust restaurants to be honest about butter, requiring visible application to prevent fraud. It transformed every bread basket into a transparency exercise, where customers could witness the butter being added, verifying its authenticity. Its dairy protectionism so aggressive it dictated serving protocols, making every meal a demonstration of butter purity. The statute represents an era when butter was so economically important that its application timing required legal oversight. 36. The bread dimensional standards. Connecticut once dictated exact dimensions and weight for standard bread loaves. Bakers selling underweight loaves faced fines or public shaming. This was early consumer protection, ensuring customers got exactly what they paid for in an era of inconsistent measurements. It paints a picture of a time when bakers had to be both artists and precision engineers, where a few grams could mean the difference between respectability and legal consequences. The law implies Connecticut faced such widespread bread fraud that dimensional standardization required legislative intervention. Authorities presumably conducted regular inspections, weighing and measuring loaves to ensure compliance. It's regulation that seems almost absurdly detailed but represented a real solution to real problems when bread was a dietary staple and accurate measurement wasn't guaranteed. The statute transformed baking from a craft into a legally regulated manufacturing process, where precision mattered as much as taste. It's consumer advocacy that modern standardized packaging made obsolete. 37. The donut hole fraud. Lehigh, Nebraska once made it illegal for bakers to sell donut holes. This wasn't hatred of the snack. It was based on logic so profoundly literal it's beautiful. Town leaders argued that a hole is, by definition, the absence of something, It's a space where the donut isn't. Therefore, charging money for a donut hole constituted ultimate fraud, literally selling nothing. The law turned a beloved bite-sized treat into criminal swindle through philosophical reasoning. It's regulation born from taking language too seriously, where the word hole mattered more than the actual fried dough product. The ordinance implies Lehi's government included someone who believed semantic accuracy was more important than recognizing that donut hole obviously referred to the removed dough, not the actual empty space. It's literal-minded legislation at its finest, where philosophical definitions of nothingness prevented selling perfectly good fried dough because of what it was called. The law stands as a monument to overthinking. 38. The hot dog indecency statute. Mobile, Alabama prohibits saying hot dog in ways that could be misinterpreted as lewd or indecent comments. This isn't about the food, it's about the name. The law is a relic from extreme public prudishness, where city officials were so concerned about double entendre, they regulated the very name of popular food. It represents the absolute pinnacle of dumb food laws. One that isn't about safety, fraud, or economics, but about the government trying to police language itself. The statute implies Mobile once had problems with citizens using hot dogs suggestively enough to require legal intervention. It's linguistic regulation taken to absurd extremes, where authorities believed they could eliminate innuendo by criminalizing certain phrasings. The law forces us to imagine Mobile's government convening to discuss the moral dangers of sausage terminology, deciding that hot dog required protection from improper usage. It's prudishness codified, where food names became subject to decency standards, making every Frankfurter vendor a potential language criminal. 39. The poisoned candy legacy. Illinois specifically prohibits manufacturing or selling candy containing poisonous or injurious substances. This sounds obvious until you learn its dark origins. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some unscrupulous candy makers used dangerous chemicals like lead, arsenic, and mercury to create vibrant colors. The law was a direct response to real public panic over poisoned sweets, a time when buying lollipops for your child felt like gambling with their life. It's regulation born from an era when food safety wasn't assumed, when colorful candy might contain literal poison. The statute represented government finally stepping in to say, stop putting heavy metals in children's food. What seems like common sense now was revolutionary consumer protection then, addressing an industry that prioritized appearance over safety. The law stands as a reminder that many obvious-seeming regulations exist because someone, somewhere, did something so catastrophic it required explicit prohibition. 40. The watermelon cemetery ban. Marion, South Carolina prohibits eating watermelon in Magnolia Cemetery. This rule is a masterpiece of legislative precision. It doesn't ban all food, only watermelon. And it doesn't ban watermelon everywhere, just this specific hallowed ground. The practical origin was likely visitors leaving messy rinds on grave sites, creating cleanup nightmares. But instead of a simple no littering sign, the city council chose to specifically outlaw a single fruit, forever enshrining watermelon as the official forbidden snack of the afterlife. The law implies that watermelon became such a persistent cemetery problem that targeted prohibition was necessary. Other fruits apparently caused no issues. Other cemeteries could handle watermelon. But in Marion's Magnolia Cemetery, this specific fruit required its own legal ban. Its regulation so specific it becomes absurd, where one fruit in one location became important enough for dedicated legislation. The ordinance stands as proof that local government can become obsessed with incredibly narrow problems. 41. The Cheese Factory Narcolepsy Rule. South Dakota makes it illegal to fall asleep in cheese factories. The mind immediately conjures images of dairy workers face-planting into vats of aging cheddar, creating public health nightmares. While the exact reason is lost to time, the rule stands as firm warning. If you're touring a creamery in the Mount Rushmore state and feel a yawn coming on, get outside immediately. A nap is not worth the criminal record. The law implies South Dakota once had enough problems with sleeping cheese workers that specific legislation was necessary. Was it the soothing hum of machinery? The warm, humid environment? The intoxicating aroma of fermenting dairy? Whatever the cause, enough people apparently dozed off in cheese factories that lawmakers said enough. We're making this illegal. It's regulation addressing a problem so specific it's almost impossible to imagine, forever connecting South Dakota cheese production with anti-narcolepsy enforcement. 42. The fork and chicken publicity stunt. Gainesville, Georgia once made eating fried chicken with a fork a jailable offense. This wasn't ancient Puritanism. It was a brilliant 1961 publicity stunt promoting the city as the poultry capital of the world. The ordinance was famously enforced when a 91-year-old tourist was playfully arrested for her culinary crime, earning national attention. The rule perfectly illustrates that the most idiotic-sounding laws are sometimes the cleverest. Gainesville didn't actually care how people ate chicken. They cared about getting their city in newspapers across America. The fake law accomplished exactly that, creating a memorable story that cemented Gainesville's association with chicken. It's legislation as marketing, where the appearance of absurd regulation generated publicity worth far more than any advertising campaign. The law proves that sometimes government theatrics serve important purposes, even if those purposes have nothing to do with actual governance. It's fake enforcement creating real results. 43. The Onion Border Patrol. For over 6 decades, transporting an unpeeled onion into Georgia was a federal crime. This wasn't protectionism, it was desperate biosecurity protocol. The law was designed to prevent spread of a specific devastating fungus that could be carried on onion skin, potentially destroying Georgia's famous Fidelia onion industry. Enforcement was incredibly strict, with trucks stopped at borders for inspections ensuring no contraband unpeeled alliums made it through. It's a powerful reminder that behind bizarre-sounding laws often lies serious, economically vital threats. Georgia wasn't being arbitrary. It was protecting an entire agricultural sector from fungal annihilation. The law transformed onions into controlled substances, requiring border checkpoints and inspection protocols usually reserved for dangerous materials. It represents agricultural defense through comprehensive regulation, where a single unpeeled onion could theoretically trigger an economic catastrophe. The statute stood for decades because the threat was real, even if the law sounded ridiculous to outsiders unfamiliar with fungal crop diseases. 44. The Athletic Frog Menu. California hosts the famous Calaveras County Frog Jumping Jubilee, naturally leading to very specific legislation. State Fish and Game Code makes it illegal to eat any frog that dies during jumping contests. This implies amazing things. First, that there's a market for athletically challenged frogs. Second, that you need a frog coroner to determine cause of death before consumption. A heart attack on the final jump? No soup for you! The law creates an absurd regulatory framework where frog mortality circumstances determine edibility. It's government regulation meeting competitive frog jumping, creating legal distinctions based on how amphibians died. Somewhere, a California lawmaker decided this specific scenario required legislative clarity, protecting competitive frogs from posthumous consumption. The statute transforms frog jumping from simple entertainment into a complex legal arena where animal performance, mortality, and food safety intersect. It's California being California, taking something absurd and making it even more absurd through overregulation. 45. The no-sharing food mandate. Dozens of American cities prohibit sharing food with homeless people in public parks. The official reason is always public health and food safety, lack of permits, and hand-washing stations. However, critics argue these laws are designed to make homeless populations less visible by discouraging them from gathering. It's regulation that pits basic human kindness against bureaucratic control. Is this genuinely about preventing foodborne illness? Or is it using safety concerns to sweep difficult social issues under the rug? The laws create a bizarre situation where offering a sandwich to someone in need becomes a criminal act, where compassion requires permits and liability waivers. It represents government regulation at its most controversial, where legitimate safety concerns become weapons in broader social conflicts. The ordinances force us to ask whether food safety rules are protecting public health or providing legal cover for criminalizing poverty visibility. It's legislation where stated intent and suspected purpose diverge dramatically. 46. The horse milk theft. Texas explicitly makes it illegal to milk another person's cow. On the surface, this is just a very specific way of saying don't steal. But the fact that it had to be written down suggests a history of bold, brazen milk thieves wandering into neighbors' pastures with buckets and dreams. It's a beautiful glimpse into a time when defending dairy assets required the full force of law. The statute implies Texas once faced enough cow milking crimes that general theft laws seemed insufficient. This specific act needed its own legal prohibition. It paints a picture of the Old West where cattle rustling was famous, but apparently cow milking was also problematic enough for dedicated legislation. The law stands as proof that property crime takes wonderfully specific forms, and that Texas lawmakers believed some thefts were so audacious they required naming. It's agricultural protection law that's both practical and absurdly specific, forever immortalizing Texas's milk thief problem in legal code. 47. The sassafras bottle bomb. Indiana once prohibited manufacturing or selling carbonated beverages containing sassafras. This wasn't an attack on root beer, it was desperate explosion prevention. Early glass bottling technology was notoriously unreliable, and natural saponins in sassafras could create immense pressure inside bottles. The result was a pocket-sized glass grenade that could detonate at any moment. The law was crude but necessary safety legislation for a pre-regulated world where beverages were legitimately dangerous. It represents an era when buying soda carried real physical risk, when bottles were improvised explosive devices waiting to happen. Indiana's solution wasn't improving bottling technology, it was banning the ingredient creating pressure. The statute implies enough sassafras-related explosions occurred that legislators decided prohibition was easier than safety standards. It's regulation responding to technological limitations rather than product problems, where the beverage was fine, but the container was deadly. The law protected Hoosiers from their own packaging until better bottles made it obsolete. 48. The Peanut Church Prohibition. Boston made it illegal to eat peanuts in church. This wonderfully specific rule almost certainly dates back to a time when churches were primary community hubs and snacks were common during exceptionally long services. One can easily picture a Puritan preacher deeply annoyed by constant, distracting cracking of peanut shells echoing through his sermon, demanding a citywide ban. It's a perfect piece of legislative history capturing eternal conflict between religious devotion and the irresistible allure of salty snacks. The law implies that peanut consumption during services became such a widespread problem that Boston's government intervened to protect sermon sanctity. It's regulation born from acoustic irritation, where the sound of nut cracking was deemed incompatible with worship. The ordinance transforms peanuts from simple food into instruments of religious disruption, making every churchgoer with a bag of nuts a potential criminal. It's government micromanagement meeting religious observance in the most absurd possible way. 49. The intoxication assessment nightmare. Bartenders face an impossible legal paradox. Laws requiring them to refuse service to visibly intoxicated customers while providing no objective standards for determining intoxication. Washington's version is notoriously strict, creating nightmare scenarios. Serve one drink too many? Severe liability for both bartender and establishment. Cut someone off too early? Angry customers and lost revenue. The law essentially requires bartenders to be amateur doctors capable of diagnosing precise blood alcohol levels through observation alone, performing this high-stakes medical judgment dozens of times per night. There's no breathalyzer at every bar stool, no objective test, just subjective assessment that could result in lawsuits, lost licenses, or physical confrontations. It turns the simple act of pouring beer into a legal minefield, where bartenders must balance liability, customer satisfaction, and personal safety under impossible circumstances. The statute sounds reasonable in principle, but becomes dystopian in practice, making every drink served a potential legal disaster. 50. The California Horse Protection Act. California law makes it illegal to sell, buy, or serve horse meat for human consumption. While this is common practice in many countries, California explicitly classifies horses as pets, not livestock, making it criminal to treat them as food sources. The law reflects a deep cultural taboo, legally separating animals we consider companions from those we consider cuisine. It's fascinating government intervention where sentiment trumps practicality. Horses are legally protected not because of health concerns, but because of emotional attachment. The statute creates a rigid culinary boundary based entirely on cultural values rather than nutritional science or safety considerations. Other states allow horse meat, other countries embrace it. But California drew its line, declaring through legislation that horses occupy a special category deserving protection from dinner plates. It's food law as cultural declaration, where government enforces not public health, but public feelings about which animals are acceptable to eat. So there you have it, 50 real American food laws that prove sanity was never a prerequisite for legislation. These aren't just amusing oddities gathering dust in forgotten law books. They're a roadmap of America's strangest fears, most bizarre priorities, and occasional moments of accidental brilliance disguised as stupidity. Some were born from crises, poisoned candy, exploding bottles, devastating genuine crop diseases. Others emerged from moral panic, regional rivalry, and the eternal human instinct to regulate things that need no regulation. The beauty is that many of these laws solved real problems, just in the most entertainingly specific ways possible. Nebraska's beer and soup requirement created a transparent fiction everyone pretends to believe. Kansas legislated pie toppings to defend regional identity. Maine declared culinary war on tomato-based chowder through legal decree. These weren't failures of governance, they were governance revealing its fundamentally human nature, complete with pettiness, paranoia, and occasional genius.